Desertification is a fancy word for land that is turning to desert. And this happens only when we create too much bare ground. There's no other cause. I have for you a very simple message that offers more hope than you can imagine. Where humidity is guaranteed throughout the year, it is almost impossible to create vast areas of bare ground, no matter what you do. Where we have months of humidity followed by months of dryness, that is where desertification is occurring. About 2/3, I would guess, of the world is desertifying. I took this picture in the Tihama Desert. Over 1,000 drums of water fell on every hectare of that land that day. The next day, the land looked like this. Some of it ran off as flooding. Most of the water that soaked into the soil simply evaporated out again. The fate of water and carbon are tied to soil organic matter. When we damage soils, carbon goes back to the atmosphere. Now, we know that desertification is caused by livestock, mostly cattle, sheep and goats, overgrazing the plants, leaving the soil bare. And I loved wildlife, and so I grew up hating livestock. Well, I have news for you. We were once just as certain that the world was flat. We were wrong then, and we are wrong again. When I was a young man, I was involved in setting aside marvelous areas as future national parks. And no sooner did we remove the hunting, drum-beating people to protect the animals than the land began to deteriorate. No livestock were involved, but suspecting that we had too many elephants, I did the research and I proved we had too many, and I recommended that we would have to reduce their numbers and bring them down to a level that the land could sustain. So our government formed a team of experts to evaluate my research. They agreed with me, and over the following years, we shot 40,000 elephants. And it got worse, not better. Looking at all the research plots I could, where cattle had been removed to prove that it would stop desertification, I found the opposite. As we see on this research station, where this grassland that was green in 1961, by 2002, had changed to that situation. Clearly, we have never understood what is causing desertification, which has destroyed many civilizations and now threatens us globally. Take 1 square meter of soil and make it bare, and I promise you, you will find it much colder at dawn and much hotter at midday than that same piece of ground if it's just covered with plant litter. You have changed the microclimate. Increasing percentage of bare ground on more than half the world's land, you are changing macroclimate. Why was it beginning to happen 10,000 years ago? Why has it accelerated lately? These seasonal humidity environments of the world, soil and vegetation, developed with very large numbers of grazing animals. These grazing animals developed with ferocious pack-hunting predators. The main defense against pack-hunting predators is to get into herds, and the larger the herd, the safer the individuals. Large herds dung and urinate all over their own food, and they have to keep moving. It was that movement that prevented the overgrazing of plants. This is a typical seasonal grassland. It has just come through 4 months of rain, and it's now going into 8 months of dry season. All of that grass you see above ground has to decay biologically before the next growing season. If it doesn't, the grassland and the soil begin to die. If it does not decay biologically, it shifts to oxidation, which is a very slow process, and this smothers and kills grasses, leading to a shift to woody vegetation and bare soil releasing carbon. To prevent that, we have traditionally used fire. But fire also leaves the soil bare, releasing carbon. And worse than that, burning 1 hectare of grassland gives off more and more damaging pollutants than 6,000 cars. And we are burning in Africa every single year more than 1 billion hectares of grasslands. We justify the burning because it does remove the dead material and it allows the plants to grow. Now, looking at this grassland of ours that has gone dry, what could we do to keep that healthy? And bear in mind, I'm talking of most of the world's land. There is only one option, and that is to do the unthinkable and to use livestock, bunched and moving, as a proxy for former herds and predators and mimic nature. There is no other alternative left to mankind. So let's do that. On this bit of grassland, we'll impact it very heavily with cattle to mimic nature, and look at that. All of that grass is now covering the soil as dung, urine, and litter or mulch, and that soil is ready to absorb and hold the rain, to store carbon, and to break down methane. And we did that without using fire to damage the soil, and the plants are free to grow. When I first realized that we had no option but to use much vilified livestock to address climate change and desertification, I was faced with a real dilemma. How were we to do it? We'd had 10,000 years of extremely knowledgeable pastoralists bunching and moving their animals, but they had created the great man-made deserts of the world. Then we'd had 100 years of modern range science, and that had accelerated desertification, and as you see in this picture, of land managed by the federal government. Clearly more was needed than bunching and moving the animals. And humans, over thousands of years, had never been able to deal with nature's complexity. But we had never tackled anything as complex as this. So rather than reinvent the wheel, I began studying other professions to see if anybody had. And I found there were planning techniques that I could take and adapt to our biological need. And from those I developed what we call holistic management and planned grazing, a planning process. That does address all of nature's complexity and our social, environmental, economic complexity. We have young women like this one teaching villagers in Africa how to put their animals together into larger herds, plan their grazing to mimic nature, and where we have them hold their animals overnight, we run them in a predator-friendly manner. We have a lot of lions and so on, and where they do this and hold them overnight to prepare the crop fields, we're getting very great increases in crop yield as well. Let's look at some results. This is land close to land that we manage in Zimbabwe. It has just come through 4 months of very good rains, it got that year, and it's going into the long dry season. But as you can see, all of that rain, almost all of it, has evaporated from the soil surface. Their river is dry despite the rain just having ended, and we have 150,000 people on almost permanent food aid. Now let's go to our land nearby on the same day with the same rainfall. Look at that. Our river is flowing and healthy and clean. It's fine. The production of grass, shrubs, trees, wildlife, everything is now more productive, and we have virtually no fear of dry years. And we did that by increasing the cattle and goats 400%, planning the grazing to mimic nature and integrate them with all the elephants, buffalo, giraffe, and other animals. But before we began, our land looked like that. This site was bare and eroding for over 30 years, regardless of what rain we got. See the change as we used livestock to mimic nature. This was another site where it had been bare and eroding, and at the base of the marked small tree, we had lost over 30 centimeters of soil. Watch the change just using livestock to mimic nature. There are fallen trees in that now because the better land is now attracting elephants, etc. This land in Mexico was in terrible condition, and I've had to mark the hill because the change is so profound. In this one, where that gully has completely healed using nothing but livestock mimicking nature, and once more we have the third generation of that family on that land. The vast grasslands of Patagonia are turning to desert, as you see here. The man in the middle, he has documented the steady decline of that land over the years as they kept reducing the sheep numbers. They put 25,000 sheep in one flock, really mimicking nature, with planned grazing, and they have documented a 50% increase in the production of the land in the first year. We now have in the violent Horn of Africa pastoralists planning their grazing to mimic nature and openly saying it is the only hope they have of saving their families and saving their culture. 95% of that land can only feed people from animals. I remind you that I am talking about most of the world's land that controls our fate. What we are doing globally is causing climate change as much as, I believe, fossil fuels and maybe more. But worse than that, it is causing hunger, poverty, violence, social breakdown, and war. And as I am talking to you, millions of men, women, and children are suffering and dying. And if this continues, we are unlikely to be able to stop the climate changing even after we have eliminated the use of fossil fuels. I believe I've shown you how we can work with nature at very low cost to reverse all this. We are already doing so on about 15 million hectares on 5 continents. And people who understand far more about carbon than I do calculate that if we do what I'm showing you, we can take enough carbon out of the atmosphere and safely store it in the grassland soils for thousands of years. And if we just do that on about half the world's grasslands, we can take us back to pre-industrial levels while feeding people. I can think of almost nothing that offers more hope for our planet, for your children and their children, and all of humanity.